So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and another battle on the old version of the game as well. And this is a map I don't recall doing before. If I have done it before, it's been a fair while to the point where I can't really remember. But yeah, this is going to be more of a river-focused battle. I don't really know how to quantify this other than that, because it is going to be a 4v4 and it is going to be defined by the body of water that runs through it. Looking at it from this angle, I think maybe I have done this map, but it was a long time ago. Yeah, and it's not going to be a lore-friendly one, this either. It's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge of different factions, shall we say. You can see that in the distance there it is Filler who gave me this one, so big thank you to him. But I guess we'll get right into it, and we will actually start with Filler and the blue team, because this isn't really a siege battle. There's no de facto attackers or defenders. I suppose the blue team are more the defenders because they have more direct access to the river, and the red team have to march towards them, but we'll see how this develops nonetheless. We do have some Wardens of the North here, so Arthedain, Filler is playing as a balanced faction to be sure, though with certainly a slant towards their ranged units, their Dunland units, that sort of thing. Wardens of the North, the pinnacle of that sort of thing as well, with the arm-piercing projectiles that they provide. We've got Dunland Troll Slayers as well. Arthedain Pikemen, another thing that Arthedain are pretty well known for, is their polearms after all. Standard unit of pikes and the Illuminous Gate Guards being the slightly higher tier version of them, give them a very solid front line indeed. We have some dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights, we have some Arthedain Men-at-Arms. I'm wondering why they're hidden actually. This isn't the sort of terrain that usually allows units to hide, but they're going to start marching pretty quickly, I would suggest anyway. Some upgraded Evendim Spearmen, not too surprising to see them either. And we have a Trebuchet crew as well. We've got some Evendim Archers, which are going to be pretty good at trading back and forth in terms of basic projectiles with the enemy. And considering that this is going to be a fairly long one, I would suggest the river is going to be where this battle is won and lost. And basic projectiles that are capable of outlasting the enemy can be very useful for that sort of thing. In the recent battle we saw for the Shire that Tommy gave me, we saw the Royal Court of House Armlaith there, and we see them again. So we don't really see them too much, where people picking their armies for themselves comes into things, but they are a little bit cheaper than the Knights of Illuminus, I suppose, even though they are, technically speaking, worse. Arthedain Marksmen, more pikes, and the Rangers, of course, and this is going to be probably one of the last battles that we get to see the body-piercing projectiles as they currently work, and a river crossing is one of the ideal venues for them to really do their thing. First example of it not exactly being a lore-friendly affair are the fact that the Dunlanders are fighting on this side of things as well, played by Hidden. And Dunland, of course, they will be their own, very much their own faction in the next version of the game, but as of now, they're more of a sort of a collection of different units, mainly from Isengard and Rhudaur. Speaking of which, the Half-Orc Spearguard, which represent probably the best defensive line unit that Dunland can field in high numbers. The Dunlanding clansmen can help pad things out with numbers, but not really in terms of quality, even with that armour upgrade of theirs, which means they do at least wear a helmet into battle, but that isn't going to save them, I would fear. A few units of Dunman Hunts as well, not as good as the Evendim Archers that we've already seen, but they will at least do a little bit of damage as they trade back and forth with the enemy. And then there's also some Spears and Riders of Orthanc, the only two completely unique units to Dunland in this current version of the game. They will be getting a bit of a, I say makeover, they're going to be changed up a little bit in the next version of the game, but they are ultimately still there. So Dunland will at least retain that high-end unit of crossbows, and I think they still have the Riders variant of it as well, though they're called something completely different and they look a little bit less armoured, but still, they won't be going anywhere, at least mechanically. We've got some Half-Orc Baneguard as well for a little bit of armour piercing, and also some Warg Riders at the back, some Snaga Skirmishers hidden in and amongst them as well, so basic Javelins, decent anti-cavalry unit, the Warg Riders, multiple HP cavalry in this version of the game is the way to go, and the Wargs are one of the few rank and file cavalry units to actually have that distinction, so it does make them a little bit more useful in that regard. They may be far apart from one another, though I suppose Harad and Dunland do technically fight on the same side of things in the lore. We have got some Southron Archers already in position on the riverside here, ready to shoot at enemies as they move forward. Harad don't lack for close ranged support with their javelins, and the Muhard Beast Hunters, while they may be basic javelins, it's still going to be enough to do a decent amount of arm-piercing damage, though the heart and soul of any Harad effort is going to be bound up in, of course, their Trollman. So interesting to see how they get on. We've got some Demons of the Desert as well, plenty of punch. We've got some Champions of Nafarat, we've got some Southrod Pikemen too, and there's also some Black Serpents just in behind. So varied, fast unit of cavalry, decent, well, I say decent, low end but ultimately armor-piercing pikes, Serpent's Fangs up here with some poison projectiles too, Muhard warriors, so yeah, plenty of numbers here for the Haradrim as well with the Haradrim spearmen. Armor piercings sort of scattered throughout their army as well, we'll see. They're always an interesting one when they're taking up a more defensive pose, Harad, and very rare to see Gondor and Harad fight side by side, but here they are with Tommy the Unwise, a player we've seen a good deal of in the last few months, been one of the main contributors of replays to the channel. We've got some Veterans of Osgiliath fully upgraded in this version of the game anyway. Very good skirmishing archer, and to be fair, the red team are probably closest over here, so the battle's probably going to get underway pretty quickly. Marksman of Caer Andros, Gondor should be pretty good when taking up this stance. They're a little bit more of a natural in this kind of position than the Haradrim are, but they can offset from one another's weaknesses. Gondor Militia Infantry are maybe a little bit more of a rare inclusion, but they're here in high numbers nonetheless. Basic sword militia. More Marksmen of Caer Andros, some Wardens of Minas Ithil, which is where the general is. Armour piercing, though maybe not quite as well rounded as the Wardens of the North that we saw from Arthedain earlier. At the back here, Citadel Guard, Fountain Guard, not too surprising to see those in action with armour piercing. And then there's also Mithrandir's retinue as well, which again offers another multiple HP Lancer, which they've got plenty of. The Riders of Orthanc, of course, are not that way inclined, but good units of cavalry all round. And then the Trebuchet and Athelian Rangers ready to meet the red team's advance. I assume the red team are going to be the first ones to make their move, starting off here with Django, playing as Rhudaur. Rhudaur marksman. Rhudaur are not going to be really up to the challenge of a skirmish fight with Gondor over the long haul. They're very, well, I say very, but they're pretty similar to Harad in terms of their overall faction setup. We'll see. Rhudaur marksman up there on the hill as well. Plenty of Rhudaur swordsmen, a couple of units of Etenwall's troll hunters, so more of that range support. The Rhudaur swordsmen offer that numbers edge that they're going to need on the front line as well. Witch-Realm Enslavers, that armour piercing that Rhudaur have throughout their army is going to be useful if they take the aggressive tactic against Gondor. Armour piercing always useful there after all. And actually the Frandline Nobles are a unit of genuine knights, so they should have the beating individually anyway of both the Harad and Gondor cavalry that's on display today, but they are only a single unit, so they need to be careful. And then we have pikes, Dunland pikemen either side of a unit of Arthedain pikemen, and then the Arthedain berserkers as well. And I think that's pretty much it from them. There may be a few hidden units as well. I'd be surprised if Trollshall axe throwers didn't make an appearance. Then we have a nuclear destroyer who's playing as Mordor. We've got some orc maulers, so more armour piercing. Less useful against Harad, but then they can spread out their units as they need to against the opponents that they perceive. We've got some Melkor's Chosen too, another really good unit of anti-cavalry cavalry. So far, it comes down to pure brute strength in melee between the cavalry units. I would suggest the red team have probably got the better of this, but we'll see. Cavalry is certainly down to player skill in terms of how you use it. Sauron's Will offer a more upper-end unit of armour-piercing shock infantry. We've got some Minas Morgul Chosen, we've got some Orc Javelins as well. Basic though they may be, they're ever very useful. Morannon Archers, and also the armour-piercing Temple Guard. Plenty of armour-piercing archers on display today that are going to be trading blows back and forth. There's a hidden unit here which may very well be the Arthedain Shadow Bows. Again, attacking rangers, or de facto attacking rangers. Going into the red limit on Blackguard of Barad-dûr is an interesting one, and it gives Mordor so much mass. They need the kind of units to follow in behind them to make that worthwhile, but they're a tried and true unit in this version of the game, so I wouldn't be surprised if the attack, or, well, I keep referring to them as attacks and defenders, but the blue team, I wouldn't be surprised if they were pretty disappointed to see this amount of Great Shield infantry coming towards them. Minas Morgul Chosen, an upper end unit, a very solid spears, not the best at dealing damage, but very, very solid. And then we have the Temple Executioners and the mighty Nazgul as well. Interesting to see how they get on. Then we have Isengard, played by Tsunami. Just across the way, of course, is going to be Dunland, so a bit of a rebellion going on there, with some Uruk-hai pikemen here. We've got some Uruk-hai archers, Uruk-hai infantry. Not too surprising to see this kind of composition from Isengard, they're a very dependable kind of faction here. Maybe not as many crossbows as I would usually expect from Isengard. They do have a unit of them, but not as many as we would usually see, but certainly plenty of infantry and pikes. Baneguard for that armor piercing in melee. The ballista should be really good on a map like this, actually. It's going to make life a little bit more difficult for the blue team setting up on the riverside when that thing is raining bolts down upon them. Guards of Orthanc, Berserkers and Nazkai, representing plenty of multiple HP goodness that Isengard can dip into. We've got some Lurtz hunting pack as well for another unit of body piercing projectiles, and some trolls off the right hand too. Last but not least, we have Dorwinion, played by Y2K86. Some very different to all of the factions on the red team we've seen so far. They of course do have a bit of elven finesse. The Morroquendi pikes will be very, very good if they can get themselves situated, though I imagine the blue team will be wanting to focus them down if at all possible. Morroquendi bows, another unit we've already seen a little bit of poison projectiles from Harad, and we're going to see more of it as well from Dorwinion. We've got some Elvalin Vineguard setting up on the front line, and Elvalin infantry too. This may be the one of the last opportunities we see for the Morroquendi Glade Masters in this guise with a long two-handed weapon, as opposed to the dual wielders they will become in the next version of the game, though the Hammer Guard I think are going to be exactly as they are now, with their hammers in one hand, shield, ultimately still armor piercing though, and a catapult here at the back as well, so another unit of artillery. Based on the fact this is a river crossing battle, I do think this is going to come down to who can use their supporting units the best. Artillery, archers, crossbows, all of that sort of thing. I kind of like the look of the red team's composition a little bit more, but we'll see how things develop. The blue team do have the advantage of being able to set up around the river more directly, and the red team maybe have to be a little bit more aggressive, but we'll see. I'll make a little bit of a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to begin. So I must say, I am a little bit conflicted on how I think this battle is going to go. We have these Rhudaur marksmen up here, and this is one of a couple of instances actually where the attackers going across the river do have a slight advantage with regards to positioning of their ranged units that they can utilise. You can see the artillery being used off in the distance over here, and again a bit of ranged terrain that the attackers can utilise, which the Morroquendi bows are doing so. So all of these things should set up the attackers maybe a little bit better than you would normally expect for such a fortified position, but the counterpoint to that is usually for this kind of battle where it's very obvious you're going to see a real meat grinder of a situation. You see the attackers have one or maybe two armies of an advantage in 5v3 or a 4v3. That's not going to be the case here, however. With a 4v4, the defenders should, in theory, have the manpower to be able to withstand a bit of a beating, and it's going to be a little bit more incumbent on the attackers to be a bit more careful. They're going to have to be more considered with their approach. But also stuff like the Isengard Ballista should really be so devastating on a map like this that you would really worry. We've already seen some instances of artillery being utilised, but it really wouldn't surprise me too much to see the initial parts of this battle be a little bit more careful and considered from the attackers, trying to whittle down the defenders so that they do have a bit of a numbers advantage going into a latter stage where they can then try and bulldoze through. But factions like Gondor pretty good when they're able to dig in. Arthedain as well. Dunland maybe a little bit less so. I mean, they certainly don't lack for numbers. It's not exactly the kind of situation in which certainly Dunland but also Harad rarely find themselves trying to dig in and lean a little bit more on some of the more fortified aspects of their armies. It is interesting that Tsunami has elected to put his ballista over with Mordor and Rhudaur rather than with his own army, perhaps seeing that the positions are a little bit more favourable for the ballista over there. So if you can use the Isengard ballista well, I think that is one of the main keys to victory here for the attackers. Rhudaur of House Armlaith not really getting a charge off, and you don't want to stay in sustained melee for too long with a unit like the Baneguard. Regular units of armor-piercing shock infantry like this are surprisingly effective at dealing damage to even the best units of cavalry pretty quickly, and a single unit of Dunland clansmen is not going to do too well. Even the Baneguard on their own would easily be able to do enough damage to them. The Trolls in conjunction with that, again, need something a little bit more serious, but Baneguard versus Baneguard, this is as close as it gets in this old version of the game to a mirror match, though as we've learned recently, mirror matches will actually be possible on the new patch of the game, so that's worth keeping an eye out for when the new patch becomes the sole content of Reforged that we see. Urukai archers moving in. I mean, javelins being used. Snaga skirmish is not the most damaging of javelins, but you don't want to lose your trolls too early. to this sort of thing. We've seen in the past how effective trolls can be. Meanwhile over here we also have Elvelyn infantry moving in. Going to be a very long-winded fight if it's just coming down to pure melee terms between the Elvelyn and the rank-and-file Arthedainian troops, neither of which are really renowned for their ability to do damage quickly. But over here, I mean, certainly from Arthedain's perspective, it's going to be more about how their ranged units can be used. As always, in a defensive position, their infantry is certainly serviceable, but they're far more capable of dealing damage through other means. Avondale archers have taken a bit of a beating at the hands of the Morroquendi bows. The attackers electing not to shoot the infantry just yet, trying to take away bits of the supporting cast, but I don't know about that. I mean, Morroquendi bows are damaging enough that you should maybe try to set your sights a little higher than mere Evandim's. Warg Riders moving in. The trolls in and amongst the snugger skirmishers, and trolls are very good against cavalry and sustained melee like this. They can take a fair amount of damage off the charge to units like Warg Riders, especially to stuff like the Royal Court just in behind. Riders of Orthanc on their way back out as well, so certainly it's not devastating for Hidden's Dunlanding host so far, but there is a bit more of a statement of intent here from Isengard than maybe the defenders would have been expecting early on, given the layout of what they've got. The main issue Isengard may run into, as we saw in the very last battle on this version of the game, on the Southron Temple, if your reinforcements are too far away, things can end up getting out of hand for you pretty quickly. Sauron's Will going to be able to circumvent this force over here. They've collapsed in on the Orc Maulers, which will allow them to deal with the Maulers pretty quickly, but this has left the hole in the lines which the Sauron's Will are now advancing through. There's the double layer of skirmishers, however. The defensive wall also can be utilised by the defenders today. Sauron's Will routing, interestingly enough. I mean, it takes a little bit to rout the Sauron's Will, but it is worth saying that they were largely on their own in behind enemy lines taking javelin fire, so even in spite of their slightly more elite nature, they do rout off there. I mean, that was the right idea, I think, from Nuclear Destroyer. It just didn't pan out because the morale collapsed, which is something you always have to consider when you're playing as an Orcish faction. Rhudaur Swordsman moving in, facing the Gondor Militia Infantry head on. I think Rhudaur Swordsman should have a slight edge in that particular matchup, but Essenmore's Troll Hunters offering their support. Once again, over here, I think it's a matter of the close proximity of all the defending reinforcements, which is causing the morale of the attacking units to be questioned. And then Gondor Militia can move in as well to make things a little bit more domineering on the front line. Mithrandir's retinue, I mean, a good charge from them as well would also do the business. Yeah, so far, I mean, they have stabilised now as a result of their reinforcements being closer. This is one of the great conundrums of being an attacker. As we've seen several times, reinforcements have just been too far away to really do their jobs effectively, both in terms of keeping your army fighting the morale issue that we've already seen in this battle so far, but also when your attack does collapse, you don't have reinforcements close enough to actually keep it going, so you have to start from your beginnings, basically. And the main reason people often leave their reinforcements further away is because they don't want it to be in range of all of the really nasty defending skirmishers, which is fair enough. That's one of the ways in which the defenders can really leverage the position that they're given in a map. And many times we see factions with good ranged options on the defence. Gondor can certainly count themselves among that. Warns of Minister Thiel firing in with their armour-piercing arrows, undoubtedly trying to go after the Frananine Berserkers. A dangerous unit at range and in melee to your standard Gondorian front line. Flaming shot being used as well, but oftentimes people, with the reinforcement errors we see, not that that's the case this time around, I don't think. Isengard moving forward, although again, Uruk-hai infantry, 119 Uruk-hai infantry broken and fighting to the death. Is that a result of the trebuchet? No, the trebuchet is not even pointing this way, so what's going on there? They should be dominating on a front line against Dunlanding clansmen. Something must have occurred. Is it the Riders of Orthanc doing damage? It's a huge amount of Questionable morale here from Isengard, especially seeing as they're only going up against Dunland. I mean, yes, there are Black Bolts on the front line, which are pretty scary for your armour-focused Uruk-hai to try to tackle, but still. You'd be expecting Isengard to be performing a little bit better than that. I assume there was some manner of quick damage being done, and the crossbows, I suppose, are the #1 suspect there. And again, we're seeing, albeit this is a voluntary retreat from Y2K's Alvelin, and Filla's Arthedainian front line continues to hold. Good opportunity to do some damage with those javelins. I mean, of all the attacking factions so far, Dorwinion have probably done the most damage to their opposite number defenders with their ranged units. It's not devastating, but still, this is the sort of thing which could open up possibilities for them later on if Arthedain do start to run out of steam and their manpower is called into question. Alvelin infantry damaged, but not out of the fight yet. And you can see over here the cost for the attackers. Mordor being completely forced back from this choke point by the Haradrim. And as a result, they will need to start again. Even the archers now have fallen silent on this front line. It's almost as if Harad is more than happy to allow Mordor to dictate the pace of things, and then they will simply react to it as a result of this initial victory that they seem to have earned. Mithrandir's Rescue also roaming around could be used to support Harad if necessary, though the presence of the Melkors chosen makes that a little bit more dangerous. Rhudaur marksman. Firing across the river. Again, it's kind of hard to gauge how much damage ranged units are doing from one side or the other. Rhudaur marksman up on the hill there for Arthedain Rangers as well. That's a very devastating position for the Rangers to be in if they have a good angle of fire, which they should, and especially against stuff like Fountain Guard, it's definitely a worthwhile target to try and go after, though Rhudaur's front line is looking a little bit bent and buckled, and Citadel Guard getting up into the faces of the Essenmoor's Troll Hunters, preventing more javelin support from being used. Arthedain Nobles need to be careful. The Citadel Guard may have been shaken. They've stabilised now. I think the reason they were shaken was point blank hits inflicted by the Troll Hunters, but you definitely don't want to be bumping your Arthedain Nobles into Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard. They will die off very, very quickly indeed. The main pillar of Gondor's strength, certainly in this version of the game. I think Gondor in the new patch are looking a little bit more rounded as a faction and less reliant on those two units to be the frontline monsters. Moving forwards again this time. Around on archers, they're out of ammunition, and then 2 units as well of Minas Morgul chosen. I mean, considering the discrepancy in quality, even with the extra little bit of armour piercing that the Southrons do offer, these heavy Mordor spears will still do the business if left unchecked. Beast Hunters' defeat seems certain. Demons of the Desert on the way across. This is another good opportunity to do a lot of damage really very, very quickly. Morgul chosen may not be the most damaging unit in the world, but forcing Mordor into a complete frontline collapse for a second time would be really devastating, I think, and that's also the perfect angle of fire, really. Already shaken, already wavering. Chances are they're going to rout as well. I mean, Trollmen of Harad being committed to melee, so Mordor may have restarted their attack, but I really don't think it's actually going to last too long, and so far Harad, with all of their armour piercing in tow, have proven to be a very tough nut for them to crack. Meanwhile, this front line now from Arthedain looking a little bit thinner on the ground. Combination of the river patrol, added ranged support coming in as well. Arthedain man-at-arms. I mean, if you were to pick a slightly more well-rounded unit between the two, you probably would go for the Alvelin, just because they don't need the extra funds committed to them to fully upgrade that armour to bring them up to the required standard, you would suggest, but ultimately still 2 very defensive units. River Patrol have also been committed into melee. Obviously they are absolutely dreadful as melee combatants, but just the extra numbers here, Dorwinion hoping to squeeze every bit of efficiency out of them. Pikemen just in behind as well can be committed, but they don't want to move in while Dorwinion still have those archers firing away. Obviously the downside to Dunland and Isengard facing off against one another is the shared units means it can be a little bit difficult to see where the front line is, a la what a mirror match will undoubtedly entail, as we see a few more of them moving forward. Morroquendi Stalkers, bit of poison projectiles moving in. This is where we could start to see the defenders finally tested from a morale perspective, and indeed Dunland looks like they have had to call upon a little bit of help from both Harad and Arthedain to keep the Isengard advance in check. This will be fine for the moment, but of course having to siphon off resources to other choke points may give other attackers like Mordor and Dorwinion the opportunity to make something happen as well. Here come the guards of Orthanc. So Isengard very intent on keeping this attack going. It's 43 Nazkai as well. I mean, that's obviously a devastating unit. Dunland's half-orc spear guard will not be sufficient long term. Isengard, though, have probably used up more of their army as a resource than many of the others. The same can be said of Dunland if they're having to call upon Harad and Arthedain, so both of them will be more depleted than their allies will be moving on into the latter stages. It's actually kind of impressive that the Minas Morgul Chosen is still standing given the horrific beating they were taking a moment ago. But they are depleted enough to the point where even a unit of basic Haradrim Spearmen will be able to deal with them, you'd think. A bit further back, another unit of Sauron's Will. Obviously the other unit of Sauron's Will largely disgraced themselves earlier, so can they regain their unit's honour? And there's also this other unit of Minas Morgul Chosen, which was not introduced to the business end of the Demons of the Desert, but is having to tangle with the Trollman, and as far as unit matchups go, that is absolutely perfect for the Trollman. A relatively low damage, armour focused, defensive unit of spears is exactly the sort of thing that they're going to monster their way through. Harad is a setup for a faction as well, because of how it's more common that factions are going to be more armour centric, so Harad have the ability to deal with them. To be fair, Rhudaur have got the same kind of abilities, and you'd imagine that a matchup against Gondor is not the worst thing in the world for them, but having to attack into a defensive position is where their own defensive deficiencies can be exposed a little bit more, and Gondor's infantry, by the looks of things, in spite of having to deal with that really nasty overwatch position from Rhudaur, and of course the throwing projectiles, we can see the throwing axes coming in. Trollshore Axe Thrower is a very efficient unit in this version of the game. Ettamor's Troll Hunters have also been a real problem. Even in spite of this punishment, the Gondorians have still been able to hold on to this river crossing, and on a map like this you have to hold on to all the river crossings, otherwise you will experience that domino effect of your defences falling apart one by one. The size of the map may help the defenders react to the fall of one of the crossings a little bit more quickly than they otherwise would, but it's still the sort of thing you've got to keep constant vigilance for, essentially. Nobles, I mean, they have been depleted. Unsurprisingly, most of the units they would have been charging into, even if they have been able to get good rear charges when they turn around, Gondor have got plenty of anti-cavalry power, but looking like they have routed a little bit now. A lot, and yeah, you can see immediately the Gondorians now are starting to retreat all that they have left. Tommy the Unwise moving back as Django will undoubtedly try to pursue him. And now the great conundrum for Harad as well. As much as Harad could pretty much indefinitely, I think, at this point hold Mordor at bay, they're not going to be able to, because otherwise they will be ultimately surrounded by Mordor and Rhudaur, and then all of this good work that they've done so far on this crossing will be undone. So we will be seeing, I think, a wholesale retreat to the settlement from this point onwards. It seems certain Southron archers still in a pretty good position as well. Harad not known for their archers, but they're in a good enough position here to make this work. Dunland retreating. This guy taking a lot of damage there. Again, every time we come over to this choke point, it seems that we've left it with Isengard looking pretty good. And then when we come back, they've taken a lot of damage very, very quickly from a source that... I'm not sure what that would... I mean, maybe here, maybe it is the Warg Riders getting in behind enemy lines, but causing a real nuisance. Not great under arrow fire, but I have to say, Dunland, on this occasion, we've missed, I think, most of the decisive moments, but they seem to have done a really good job at burst damaging down Isengard. But yes, wholesale retreats now underway. Arthedain and Dunland doing much the same thing. This will, of course, allow Dorwinion to move forward. There's not really anything over rearguard. I mean, they could have left that one unit of man-at-arms behind. It probably would have been preferable, but they have elected not to. What will Harad do? I mean, Harad kind of thinking about doing a little bit of a sally forth, I think, but I think they realise now that the clever move is definitely to retreat to the settlement. So, like I was saying, they will avoid the domino effect as a result of that. As soon as Gondor's front line started to buckle, they didn't send more and more units forward to what was ultimately a lost cause, which is another thing which defenders we've seen do in the past and pay the ultimate price for. Here, decisively, all of the defenders have decided to pull back once a position is lost to greener pastures. And now, we shall see. Let's take stock of what the attackers and the defenders still have left. So Morroquendi Stalkers, we've seen them make a nuisance of themselves. Don't know how much ammunition they necessarily have left. Elvelyn infantry are here. Isengard, who have committed a lot forwards, they don't have too much left. Lert's hunting pack, however, very dangerous. Fully healthy berserkers, so not the biggest army, but some very heavy hitters nonetheless. Dorwinion, the fight they had with Arthedain was more one of trading skirmishers, one that I think Dorwinion actually didn't do too badly in, and you can see they do actually have a fair amount of units left, including their own heavy hitters, pikemen as well. So they've got numbers, they've got quality. Dorwinion will be a cornerstone, I think, of if the attackers are to go on to win this. Rhudaur, they'll be pretty happy, I think, with their day's work against Gondor, although you can see here the Black Serpents trying to take bites out of their army and largely succeeding, although Diego, the initial charge was good, but leaving them in there for just a little bit too long and close proximity to even the most simple unit of pikes is going to absolutely melt cavalry. Rhudaur marksman, but yes, Rhudaur, they've got the numbers, although to be fair, they probably have used quite a lot of their ammunition already, especially their throwing projectile ammunition, which I think was the right call because they clearly did a lot of damage there. Mordor, on the other hand, struggled significantly more against Harad. It's a very narrow choke point, the narrowest of the bunch in all fairness, and the infantry matchups were not all that favourable for Mordor, so I don't know if there's much more Nuclear Destroyer could have done in that respect. And it's not as if the most important units of Mordor have been used yet. You can see still the Temple Executioners, Temple Guard, Nazgul. The Black Guard of Barad-dûr are still here as well, which could be very, very useful for breaking the back of the defenders when they're trying to hold on to the initial front lines. Arthedain, Shadowbow. So as much as Mordor won't have been too impressed with their initial performance, the kind of units they have left could make them maybe the most important force for the attackers here late on. There's also the small matter of the Isengard Ballista. I would really say of the attackers, the only ones who are going to have to be playing more of a support role will be Isengard because of the losses they've taken, but the Ballista itself could also be very, very devastating. So still, I think the attackers won't be too worried about the situation. Arthedain, several depleted units on the most immediate part of the front line, but they themselves still have units like Dunedain Rangers. Defenders can really still lean on them. Wardens of the North as well, armour-piercing arrows going after key targets. Blade Masters and Elvel and Hammerguard over on this side would probably be the best targets to go after with them. Berserkers can be dealt with via other means. Harad, they'll be very pleased with what they did initially, and they've still got some of their very best units of Trom and Hashari Shadows firing away. I don't know whether the enemy forces are bunched up enough for that to be worthwhile, although maybe just going after some of the high tier units along with the Serpent's Fangs. You may as well, I mean, Mordor not backwards and coming forwards here, but have to try and deal with what they can. I mean, Nazgul are a small unit. Those were ballista bolts. Yeah, I think maybe I'd probably be going after the Temple Executioners as well, in all fairness. They're going to be a little bit easier to kill off unit models than the Nazgul with a unit like the Serpent's Fangs, and they're still extremely dangerous. Shari Shadows go back into hiding. Riders of Orthanc, another dangerous unit. So both sides, really, attackers and defenders alike, have still got all of their most important units, you would suggest. The big match winners. We've seen the Demons of the Desert already used, but to good effect, so can't complain too much there. Caroline Berserkers also used earlier on from an attacking perspective, Nazkai as well, so it's not as if every elite unit is still remaining. Both sides have been committing them to the fight, but both sides have had quite a balanced approach between aggression, level of units committed. It's a pretty competitive fight, this, so far. High hopes going into the final stages. Elvalin infantry moving forward, already shaken, however. Morale has been a real factor in this battle. Morale tested. I mean, the Elvalin as well have actually got pretty decent morale. Those elven training programs that the Avari have put them through should make them a hardy unit, not just physically but mentally as well. Vinegard should help stabilise things a little bit more, but the true business has yet to really begin. Part of the issue that I think Dorwinion are having here is, yeah, they're keeping their elite units far away because they know the Wards of the North are waiting for them, but that does also indicate that they'll be hoping they can push their way through these defensive positions without the assistance of really high-end units, otherwise they would be committing them. And stuff like dismounted Fornos Knights should be really good against these more basic units of Elvalin. Wendy bows are not terrible in melee. In fact, they're pretty damn good, as you would expect from elven archers of this level. And ultimately, Dunland hunters won't be too much of a concern for them, but dismounted Fornos Knights maybe will, and Arthedain pikemen now moving in as well. So, thus far, unsurprisingly, Dorwinion are the ones having to take the lead because they have far more left than Isengard. Over on this side of things, there are 2 choke points that can be exploited, so Mordor and Rhudaur can still split off into completely separate entities for the time being. Once again, still facing off against their old foes in Gondor and Harad. Neither of which, I mean, Rhudaur will be happier with that matchup, I suppose, given how roughly Mordor were treated at Harad's hands on the river itself. I mean, they're still steady. Only standard units of infantry. That trebuchet's in a nasty position as well. Wardsman is the Thiel. But as with many a siege battle, as this now is, the river section of the battle is over. As with many a siege battle as the attackers, you don't really have the luxury of completely avoiding the traps that the defenders set for you. Sometimes you just kind of have to walk into them. Take your medicine, really. You have to be comforted by the fact that these positions are the things which the defenders are pretty much completely reliant upon to win the battle. Well, there was catapult shots coming in from afar, but this is maybe worrying signs for the attackers that this front line is on the verge of complete collapse. Nazkai. 11 of them still remain. Heavily damaged yet not completely killed yet. Trying to be mobbed by sheer numbers. Half-orc, Spearguard and Dunland hunters. Not usually the sort of thing that would trouble Nazkai, but yeah, the Dorwinion section of this front line really has fallen apart at a rate of knots. Trying to go after the enemy. Oh, and he did as well, you can see. A direct hit on one of the catapults there. Interesting that the defending artillery is willing to use their ammunition on attacking artillery, though. I'd still say the well, actually, Isengard Ballista may have missed a little bit of a trick, actually, by not being used early. Because it would have been more effective, I think, on the river crossing. It's going to be far more difficult now to get into a position that's really super effective when the defenders have got these large walls that they can cower behind. So maybe that should have been employed a little bit earlier, though the Isengard Ballista is still something they have access to. So it could still be a real difference maker. Gondor Militia Infantry charging forwards, maybe trying to interrupt the Troll Hunters and Troll Short Axe Throwers from throwing their projectiles, though Gondor Militia Infantry maybe won't have the quality level necessary to win this fight outright. Further back. Still Fountain Guard. So Gondor, in spite of them having a little bit more trouble than their Harad allies did on the river crossing, they still did decently enough, and they still have some very good defensive units as well. Muhard Warriors, the initial front line. Interesting to see the Blackguard of Barad-dûr moving forward. That's a sign, or should be, a sign of intent from Mordor now. And there goes one of the large ballista bolts as well, sailing overhead. Going after the Serpent Guard? Going after something. Demons of the Desert still alive, actually, still with ammunition. They don't have the most ammunition. I was just kind of assuming they had used up all their projectiles, but again, the Blackguard of Barad-dûr on the verge of breaking. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr need to be used as part of a more general advance with other units if they're committed on their own like this, especially with the questionable morale issues that we've seen quite a few factions on the battlefield today have. Their melee prowess will be exposed, again, especially by a force like Harad with their ability to do damage quickly to this kind of unit. Mordor dragging their heels a little bit again. Can their high quality truly be the thing to save the day? Dorwinion moving forwards again. Ooh, that's also very, very unfortunate. Again, we come back over to this section, and Blackguard of Barad-dûr are broken and fighting to the death. They're here, still stood perfectly in formation. They must have moved forward. They didn't even get to the front line. And the trebuchet is not pointing in the exact direction. So how did they rout? I mean, I assume it's close proximity of high-end units and overwhelming numbers. Could have been friendly fire, I suppose, in the catapult, but I kind of doubt it. I think this battle showcases perhaps more than any other battle that we've seen in the past, the need to have your units close by to your attack if you're the attackers, because otherwise if your units feel as though your support is too far away and they're never going to make it in time, morale is going to suffer pretty severely, and you can see that here. Y2K once again is having to voluntarily pull his units off the front line so they can reset, and all of these things, we've seen it more than once at this point, and it's really starting to add up to the point where you would suggest the defenders are really taking this battle by the scruff of the neck. Again, complete victory. Once again, Mordor having to completely reset themselves as well. So far, this fight is still kind of ongoing, but you'd have to say, of all the attackers that have been able to more consistently force their opponent onto the back foot, Rhudaur have probably done the best job of that, although artillery from Gondor, the defensive positioning, I mean, melee-wise, Gondor have showcased their resilience here in a less than ideal circumstance for themselves. They probably have the most difficult initial defensive position because of that hill Rhudaur could take advantage of, and because of the slightly wider nature of their choke point, but now also positionally. They did manage to get some Blackwolds in behind enemy lines here to go after the Athelian Rangers, but the Blackwolds are not going to be able to last. The Rangers can look after themselves well enough in melee, and with the help of the veterans of Osgiliath, that's going to be the end of the Hillman Berserkers. As if that wasn't enough, the Trollmen of Harad are also coming across. Being hung out to dry a little bit by the Gondorians. They've come over here to help though, because they're charging into the Rhudaur line on their own, which is almost certainly going to result in their defeat, especially with these pikemen present. From javelins nearby also. Resetting themselves. Attacking artillery, and you can see there actually one of the defending trebuchets has fallen. Isengard Ballista playing their part in that. And the Isengard Ballista as well, returning from routing the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, so I mean that is something that they can take solace in, and with this renewed effort, a bit of help from Mordor, what remains of Isengard, but mostly a Dorwinion-led effort, they are starting to worry Arthedain a little bit, and this may be the decisive moment in the battle. If the attackers can make something like this stick, which they've had trouble doing in this battle so far. Rhudaur did it on the river, which encouraged the retreat back to the settlement in the first place, but there's not been enough of it of the attackers in this battle so far. But if they can do it now, that may very well be enough, because the defenders still reliant on having a solid position. I don't know whether they're still going to be able to maintain that. The unit of Elvel and Vinegard moving forward. Nandor Gladeguard. This is the kind of engagement where their fragilities will probably be exposed, but more units are just needed on the front line here to try and make something happen. Maybe time for the high-end units, in all honesty. Maybe just throw everything forwards as a Hail Mary, but the Dunedain Rangers in a nasty position, as we've seen on the other side with the Gondorian Trebuchet and the Athelian Rangers. The Dunedain Rangers in a position to shoot into the sides here, especially with a lot of those Morroquendi units. The Elven units are not going to be able to withstand this kind of damage at all well. You can see that the momentum that the Blackguard of Barad-dûr were causing, from a little bit there it looked like they were getting somewhere, but the defenders commit more reinforcements, utilise their rangers as a crutch, and then back to square one for the attackers. There's still 3 Nazkai remaining. It's been a taxing fight for them, but they've done their best. Over here, all quiet on this front once again. What do Mordor have left? Orc Javelins, Brannon Archers, Temple Executioners still taking hits from the Serpent's Fangs, though still very much alive. Shadow Bows, Temple Guard, Nazgul, so all of the high-end units, but they're going to find themselves completely outnumbered unless they try and do something a little bit bolder pretty soon. Rhudaur, having been turned back from the settlement, not able to repeat their feat at the river. Going after those Wards of Minas Ithil, killing off the remaining 3 of them, but surely the Fountain Guard must be the first port of call now. Exactly the kind of unit that the Trollshaw Axe Throwers were designed to be effective against. Blank fires there. No? Marksman Care Andros. Moving forward, I mean, they would be enough to absolutely butcher Trollshaw Axe Throwers in melee, but I think they're a little bit more concerned about what level of reinforcements are close by, so which Roman slavers, but honestly, Rhudaur don't have too much left, unless they've got units that are hidden. I mean, Ferodrum Javelins may reveal themselves. So there's still some individual units of concern for the defenders, but I think the defenders will be feeling pretty good about things at this juncture. I mean, having a look. Yeah, they are winning. The defenders, obviously, attackers do have a tendency in the late game to surge forward, though less so in 4v4s like this, you would say. Again, the Trollmen of Harad have once again showed their class in this battle, against their overlords in Mordor no less. Rhudaur trying to come forward to help give Mordor a bit of a hand with their pikemen, but again they're shaken. Reinforcements too far away. Ferodrum Javelins moving across. I mean, reinforcements actually aren't too far away on this occasion. I feel as though the morale issues in this fight have been enhanced from what we would usually see, but I mean, maybe it's not too surprising. These are pretty grim situations that the attackers have been asked to try and force their way through. Pretty much point blank catapult hits. Hitting the Arthedainians. Don't know if those rangers have still got ammunition or not, but I mean they've probably got one last attack in them, Isengard and Dorwinion, because they don't really want to be trying to ration what they've got left out here into two. And ultimately with one big alpha strike, the Glade Masters and especially the Hammer Guard actually, plenty of armour piercing, Arthedain looking a little bit flimsy. Fought long and hard, but they may need some assistance from what remains of their allies. Dunland, unsurprisingly, maybe don't have that much left. Their quality being called into question. Wards of the North firing away. Spears of Orthanc as well. So it's going to come down, I think, to ranged support here. Whether these crossbows, these armour-piercing arrows, the body-piercing arrows as well, whether or not they can all deal enough damage quickly enough to this remaining Dorwinion horde to be able to win this battle once and for all. Oh no, you don't want to be taking your Hammer Guard off the front line. You don't want to be going in there and then losing your bottle. These archers and projectiles are not going anywhere. You may as well throw caution to the wind at this stage. Trojan javelins are still there. I mean, it's certainly not a lost cause for the attackers at this point. A few key hits in places could well be enough to turn their fortunes around. That is not what they need, however. The catapult is going to be one of the key things to try and help them get back into this fight. That's Hunting Pack moving forward as well. Still a few remaining riders from Dorwinion getting caught up on the front line. Wards of the North now getting into melee as well, offering their own level of quality. Trollshore axe throwers, of course, mainly being seen from a Rhudaur perspective today, but this is where they can really earn their stripes under Dunland's banner as well. Lancer forces evenly matched for a while. It's a large quality spike though that Dorwinion are definitely offering this attack. And I think the Isengard Ballista crew moving in as well. Some defending Blackwolds, the Annuminous Gate Guards still here, so all of the really high-end projectile units other than the Spears of Orthanc. So it's actually the Dunlanders that are offering the entirety of the range support at this point. All of the Dunedain are having to commit themselves to melee. Varying levels of effectiveness from them, but all of them will be definitely welcomed on the front line. What's going on there? They are moving exceptionally quickly. What's going on with that? That looks so stupid. Not sure what's going on there. Weirdness has definitely been afoot in this battle so far. The Uruk-hai Berserkers haven't really enjoyed being on this front line. Their defensive fragilities laid bare. Another unit of cavalry moving in, but yeah, I think this is pretty much it. Some ground was made by Dorwinion in this final attempt, but I think this is going to be it. Trollshore axe throwers have been engaged in melee. Some of the Nandor Glade Guard getting in behind enemy lines. Arthedain General does fall though. The kind of morale issues we've seen in this battle so far, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that has an impact, but as if on cue, the Dorwinion General also dies, so all things are equal once more in that regard. And there goes the Isengard General as well. Whatever they have left though, they're obviously less numerous on this front line anyway, but that may very well be enough to get Isengard to rout off. And again, with that attack happening on the other side, that was really the green flag as well for Mordor and Rhudaur to also try and throw caution to the wind, I think, and try and move in as part of a more united effort. I mean, Rhudaur at least have made the token effort to do so, but I say token effort, actually, no, there are Witchram enslavers in here. Genuine quality being committed, but Mordor should be doing the same thing as well, especially with the level of individual quality that Mordor have. Maybe that could have been enough to make something happen for the attackers as well, but I think too often at this stage in proceedings have we seen the attackers take a heavy beating and have to build back up. And I think with a complete victory over on this side as well, reinforcements will be able to come across. I mean, I guess it's not beyond the realms of possibility given what we've seen. That in recent times that the Nazgul could maybe try and dig out some sort of miraculous win for the attackers. Broken and fighting to the death, I think that's pretty much it. 61 Black Wolds, the catapult crew. And yeah, that is going to be it. Again, just a little bit too fragmented, perhaps, the attackers. Definitely a factor in things. Still the Riders of Orthanc as well. I mean, not a shock cavalry unit by any means, but when you've got a high-end unit of cavalry that's this healthy in the late game, it's a bad sign for your opponents. That is... I still smell Balin Hammerguard. Trying to kill off more of these Trollshaw Axe Throwers. What remains... Riders of Orthanc will be off as well to pester the Mordor position as well. Not a huge amount they have left in all fairness that is going to be sent over as reinforcements. 14 Hammer Guard, Blade Guard, they're chasing something. I mean, even if they were to catch up to the Spears of Orthanc, it's not going to matter too much. There are no longer enough of them. Are they going to be able to get that extra shot off as well? It doesn't look like it. They will at least avoid that. They were moving over here, I think, to try and help deal with the final roll of the dice from Mordor. The Nazgul, though, they're moving forwards on their own, which I don't really know what's going on out here. I mean, they want to be trying to get all of their units into the settlement as quickly as they possibly can so they can avoid being pestered by the Riders of Orthanc like this. The Arthedain Shadowbows still with a bit of ammunition as well, a sign that Mordor have left maybe too many of their high-end units for later. That's been a fairly common thing that we've seen, though, several players do in the past. They've left their elite units for later, but by the time later comes, it's already... the battle is already beyond you. And ultimately, it was a relatively pointless endeavour to do so. What remains of the Hashari Shadows, which we saw firing from atop the walls earlier. They're not going to do a huge amount of damage as they charge into something as bulky as Witch Realm Enslavers, but they'll do their best, I'm sure. Defeat is a distinct possibility. Riders of Orthanc. Trebuchet may still have ammunition in all fairness. We only saw a couple of volleys. Good effect against Rhudaur, but constantly really being used in a supporting role. Orc Javelins and Temple Guard. Arthedain Shadowbows responding in kind. Riders of Orthanc should probably be getting over here and trying to silence what remains of these Mordor units. Champions of Nafarat, under normal circumstances, very domineering. There goes the Rhudaur General. Ironically, the same model as the Dunland General that literally ran him over. As I was saying, under normal circumstances, Champions of Nafarat enjoy an advantage against most things they face off against 1v1, but that is not the case against the Nazgul. But numbers-wise here, we've got the fairly healthy Black Wolds, the almost completely healthy Serpent's Fangs coming in as well, and the Nazgul's only support is a unit of Orc Javelins, which will buckle under the pressure pretty quickly, you would suggest. And comes what remains of the Demons of the Desert as well, who often are a little bit underwhelming in melee, but they are ultimately still units of the level of quality which will just add to the dominance here on the front line. Mostly Harad that remain. The two high-end Orthanc units from Dunland still here. Some scattered remnants of Gondor and Arthedain, but very little. So it's been a close battle, this. Like I think the superior organisation of the defenders is the main reason why I think they do deserve the victory here. Unsurprisingly, the Orc Javelins. I mean, to be fair, at least they fought. They broke and then fought to the death. Had to give that in their favour. 106 Southron archers, still spears of all thank as well. I mean, Nazgul, they will take a little while to whittle down, even for some of the scariest trollmen that Harad have to offer. Trebuchet crew and Dunland Rangers just all mobbing the Temple Guard in melee to make sure they cannot use their steel bows, though. They are, of course, very strong in melee as well. There goes the Mordor General, but what they have left is going to need to be killed the old-fashioned way. Vets of Osgiliath. The Fountain Guard. I mean, having a look at the percentages now, it did contract a little bit actually. It was 6/7% earlier on, it's now only 4%, so the late game injection of killing power that the high-end units the attackers had left did make a difference, but not the difference. But really, if any one of those failed attacks earlier on took hold, maybe, you know, the Blackguard of Rhudaur pushes, Dorwinion's final effort, if they had a little bit more left in the tank, it wouldn't have taken too much more for the attackers to turn this around. One of the main things, like I mentioned, I think the Isengard Ballista being used on the river section of the battle rather than this later settlement section, that would have made a huge difference, I think. And it really would have put the defenders on the back foot as well going into the second phase, whereas they were able to start the second phase of the battle in the settlement more on their terms than the attackers would have liked. So fairly key choices there, but overall the battle has been what it's been. And with that in mind, I do think the defenders are worthy victors today. It's just going to be a case of how many the Nazgul can take down with them. They're going to... Spears of Orthanc being set up like a firing squad. High-end crossbow bolts, in all fairness, will be enough to deal with the Nazgul. Those Nazgul, nasty things, aren't they? Managing to finish off what remains of the demons of the desert. Cavalry riding on through. 4 remain. It is going to be the Orthanc units that gain the last kills. Just 1 remains. 1 at the centre of all of this mess. That's going to be that. Didn't see the... To be fair, there's not really a position on this map other than that very slight incline over there that could be used as a last stand. This is definitely a settlement that really encourages you to defend with all that you have for the walls themselves. Obviously the first stage being for the river as well. But yeah, very multifaceted map. We didn't see the section in the hills get utilised on this occasion, but then that's not terribly surprising. I feel like this map is always going to centre itself around the river and the settlements anyway. Like I said, defenders, I think, were the victors in the end, and I think Harad did very, very well. They matched up very nicely against Mordor on this occasion, but even the initial engagement between Rhudaur and Gondor were in probably the least advantageous position for the reasons that I said. And they still did a reasonable job, even though for the river, at the very least, Rhudaur were victorious. They were not able to carry that through into the settlements, and that longevity was ultimately the key. On the other side, Arthedain and Dunland, several of the more decisive moments in the battle I feel like we kind of missed, because when we left looking at it, we saw Isengard doing reasonably well, committing some strong units and really testing the defence. Then when we came back, they were in almost total collapse. That was a little bit peculiar. Dorwinion took a more measured response, and as a result they were more healthy in the late game, but ultimately that wasn't enough to see them over the line. Like I said, I mean, Isengard got the most kills of all of the attackers, but again, that's not terribly shocking given the fact that it was mostly them against Dunland, and Dunland were by far the most numerous of the defenders, and indeed actually the most numerous army on the field as a whole. So you have to take that with a pinch of salt, but yes indeed. Let's see what did the damage for Arthedain. Filler, of course, the player we were seeing from the perspective of. Yeah, I think when that settlement defence was happening, the high tier skirmishers, the Troll Slayers, the Warns of the North, and it would not surprise me to see the Rangers really filling their boots as well. 311 is fairly tame actually for a kill count on Rangers, but still enough. You know, you want to be getting 300 or over on a unit of Rangers like this, I think. The Trebuchet, not a huge amount of kills, but used at key moments. I think the Gondorian Trebuchet was perhaps more important for their efforts, given the deficit they were running against Rhudaur at the time. But yeah, more or less what you'd expect. Maybe Raw Court House Armlaith a little bit disappointing. But yeah, big thank you to Filler for sending this one in. Again, obviously not really any sort of theme to this one. It was more for the battle itself, which was actually fairly competitive, and a good example of how coordination and organisation among the defenders can really be incredibly important to their chances at winning the battle overall. And it was nice to see a map that we haven't seen in a while as well. I think I have shown this one in the past, but it was a long time ago. So yeah, the backlog for the old battles I have on Reforged are almost completely spent at this point. I'm sure I will still get sent the occasional one or two, because I think games are still being run on the old version of the game. So we will still be seeing it from time to time, but I think it'll be like mid-June by the time this one comes out, and there's every chance that by then the new patch will be, if not outright release, pretty much all the stuff I'll be showing will probably be previews. So again, we'll see. But bear in mind that I do run, you know, at least a month ahead of schedule with a lot of the stuff that I record, so it's a little bit weird for me to try and plan in advance at this stage. And like I said, when it comes to the actual channel scheduling itself, it is worth keeping an eye on the YouTube community tab, and any potential channel update videos, which may not be telegraphed. It may be just the sort of thing which I do, maybe even as a live stream, within the next few weeks, the coming weeks and months, which I've been saying this for pretty much the past year at this point, but at some point in time there is going to be a period where everything's going to change personally for me, in terms of, you know, my professional life, but it's my intent that at least initially it won't have any sort of impact on the channel, and in terms of like long term, I want the channel to remain as it is anyway. It just may be that I need to readjust what days I upload on and that sort of thing. One thing's for sure, regardless of what happens, pretty much, my ability to do the channel will only improve when I move on from my current position, which hopefully will be sooner rather than later at this point. It was supposed to be at the start of this year, but that didn't work out, but hopefully it will be somewhat sooner. But yeah, enough of my waffling. Again, big thank you to Filler for sending this one in. Big thanks to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.